All right, folks, it's, is it 5:31 there? Is that what it is?
Yep.
Jennifer, are we recording?
We are recording, sir.
All right. Well, then let's go to work. Let's call to order the meeting of the Edina City Council's work session on Tuesday, March 19, 2024. It is 5:31 p.m. We're in the community room at City Hall, City of Edina. And roll call, please.
Councilmember Agnew. Here. Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson. Here. Councilmember Risser. Here. Mayor Hovland.
Here. We've got two topics to discuss. In fact, it's all engineering night tonight. Pick out your favorite engineer, give him a hug. Afterwards. And we got a lot of things to talk about. So anyway, starting with our work session, and we're going to discuss both Morningside C street reconstruction assessments, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Grandview parking ramp, the ADA history over there, and then what's going on presently, I think, with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Yep. At least, you know, I think we were wondering whether it was going to be litigation or just investigation, and we'll hear more about that.
Yep.
So, let's, anything you wanted to add, Manager Neal, before we launch into the first topic?
No.
Morningside C?
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
Our Director of Engineering is taking both of these topics on, and so we'll let him start with Morningside C, street reconstruction.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This is in regard to, first it was community comments, and then it was a petition response. So June 6th of last year, there was a community comment presentation from a group of residents from a Morningside C neighborhood. They then officially submitted a petition, and the council accepted that on June 20th. July 7th, we met with the newer members of the council, Member Agnew and Risser, and we had a discussion about how our street reconstruction program works, how assessments work, and the assessment policy, just to get kind of everybody up to the same level when we started talking about this topic. And then on July 18th, staff responded to that petition at that city council meeting. We didn't receive any specific directions, so we considered the matter closed, that we would continue to move forward to October to the assessment hearing and assess as appropriate. In October, during the assessment hearing, those same residents came and spoke again during community comment, even though their neighborhood wasn't under consideration for assessments that night. It was the project before them. Their project was in 2023. So at the time, council asked for more discussion, and that's why we're here this evening to have that discussion. So the comments right from the residents that filed that petition, these were their words. They said, the petitioners feel assessments are inequitable and unfair, and they're representing Morningside C. So that was the 2023 project. They felt assessment calculations go against common sense, general fairness, and is inconsistent with the city's stated policy objectives. And they request that the city council review the proposed assessments for Morningside C and adjust accordingly. So that was their request in their petition. They also had this slide. They were really focused in on Morningside because it was a unique situation where we did Morningside D&E in 2022 and then did Morningside C in 2023. We usually don't do back-to-back projects right next to each other. We try to break those up over years, but this time we decided to do them together. Part of it was because of the flood infrastructure project. And this graphic just shows the number of REUs in each project. So on the left was the earlier project. Anything blue is 1 REU. That's in our policy, and then the other colors are various REUs. And then on the right-hand side was Morningside C, where you can see some of those properties are green, and that's a 0 REU. That was one of the concerns with the neighborhood of the zero quality, 0 REU parcels there, and some are city-owned. And there's reasons for that, and I'll get into that in a minute. We had this question in December of 22 when we started having the public hearing for Morningside C for the 23. So we posted a memo on Better Together Edina to address this very question from that group of neighbors before they came and commented 6 months later. So the memo, probably still on Better Together, talks about the 0 REU lots. Their lots are 30% wider than the other lots in the previous year, so you're going to pay for 30% more streets. Yeah, you pay for basically the street in front. It's not a linear footage, but it's a number of REUs, so it's 30% wider. And then at the time, we estimated unit prices were going to increase about 17% between those two projects. So kind of a big increase in unit costs. So those were the reasons in that memo that we posted to the Better Together page. So now if we take a step back and just talk about our street reconstruction program over 20 plus years, The red box is Morningside. That's the focus of the petition. The assessment policy is applied consistently over all these neighborhoods over the years. We made some tweaks, and I'll show you that in a second. Each neighborhood has unique characteristics. So it could be street lengths, it could be curves, lot sizes, unbuildable lots, vital infrastructure lots like lift stations and well houses, and then flood areas. Assessments vary by year, by area. It's just not an exact science. You can't assess everybody the same amount unless you choose to do it that way, which we haven't. The policy itself was developed in 2003. Lots of times we've had various consulting groups look at this. We've brought revisions to the council to say, let's maybe look at this, the curb and gutters out of the storm sewer fund. We changed the assessment timing from 10 years to 15 years, the interest rates. So staff and these consultants all had a good look at the policy over the years. And then in 2020, we had the street funding task force that did a lot of this work, and that led to a policy revision in 2021. So just touching on the task force, they did a final report that was dated February of 21. 7 residents with varied backgrounds. There's the list of residents that participated in that working group. Some had been assessed before, some had not. Some had moved and been assessed multiple times in their time in Edina. We had great 10 months of working together. We had 16 meetings, very in-depth review. Multiple different attorneys were helping us in that analysis along with staff. So they noted that the policy needed to change. And I think the thing that they called out in the very intro of the report is that the policy is both fair and unfair at the same time. And that's exactly what the petitioners here are stating, that it's just not fair. We presented those policy changes to the council in July of 21, and those were accepted. Some of the things we did, we removed subcuts, we removed retaining walls, and then now we're in that transition period from assessment, 100% assessments to 100% taxes over the next, at the time was 16 years. And they looked at all the different funding options. They looked at assessments and general tax levy dollars and franchise fees. They looked at percentages of assessments, just setting that flat rate for everybody, setting a max rate, looking at assessment amounts versus the market benefit, looking at lot sizes and maybe tiering them. So they looked at all different things, and they came to the same conclusion that what we're doing now is as fair as it's going to get when we look at all the various factors that are part of street reconstruction. The residential equivalent unit, that was an item that was based on transportation back when the policy was originally adopted. It's a factor that compares properties to single-family residence. So a single-family home is a 1, multifamily is 0.8. And then there's additional factors for commercial, industrial, and public use properties there. There's the table that's right out of the policy. It's based on square footages we get right from the assessing department when we do those other type of property classes. And that's how we do the calculations for total REUs within a neighborhood reconstruction project. So this slide is just showing you the difference within, just in 2018, the preliminary assessments for these projects. You can see there was various projects, but if you take those middle 5 are all of kind of the same local street reconstruction. The assessments varied from $8,000 to nearly $20,000, and that's just in 1 year. So again, we're seeing this variation based on all those factors that I mentioned earlier with what we find out in the length of streets and lot sizes and different stuff like that. So not anything that's new, what the petitioners are experiencing right now. And again, this just shows, there was another comment about the rate of the assessment, and then we normalized it to $20 on that very right-hand column. And again, the assessments that they were proposed between $8,000 and $13,000 are in line with what's proposed here between the 2 neighborhoods in Morningside that we're discussing this evening. And then I'll get into just some of how we handle some of those lots, how we come up with REUs from the city side. You know, we assess ourselves if the property is buildable. So if it's in a floodplain, we don't assess it because no one can build there, so we don't assess, and that's been our practice. Or if it's like the graphic on the right, that's well number 3. So we didn't assess because that's a vital piece of infrastructure that, again, can't be developed. But if we can assess ourselves, we do. So in Arden Park, this was a previous project. We assessed ourselves 5 REU, and that's that purple area right over here because it's the same size lots as across the street. So we assessed ourselves 5 there, and then the purple area up here again was a city assessment. Same thing for this Normandale project. It's near the Edina Art Center, Roslyn Park. We assessed ourselves 7 lots that were outside of the flood shape, and the flood shape is in red, so anything outside that, we assessed ourselves that amount, and the rest of that area of city property, we did not assess. So just showing that we've done this on nearly every project, there's been city property somewhere within. This is a look at the assessments between the two neighborhoods. So again, Morningside D&E was first, that was 2022 construction, and Morningside C was 2023 construction. So we have that preliminary assessment. That's what we come in front of you in December of every year and give you those estimated numbers. So in Morningside C, it was 13,800. In D&E, it was 9,300. And that's the number that the petitioners were really comparing, was that delta of, that $4,000 plus dollars. Then we look at the numbers again when we open bids 3-4 months later, and we open bids, D&E didn't change at all. We were right at the number at 9,300. In Morningside C, we saw some good numbers there, and the estimated assessments came down to $10,800. So a delta of $1,500 at that point for assessments. Now, during the course of this time, D&E finished up. We were ready to assess last October, and that rate was $8,340. And we just finished looking at some numbers from last year's construction to do an estimate for Morningside C. It's not finalized until July, but we're getting pretty close. We're estimating $9,500. So we're $1,200 difference right now between the two projects. And again, if we didn't have those policy changes that we talked about, we'd be up in the $20,000 for assessments. And again, that Morningside C is not finalized till the summer when we finish those costs. So if we look at one factor, just the 30% wider lots, and if we take the D&E at $8,300 and times it by, increase it by 30%, we're at approximately $10,800, which is more than the Morningside C estimated final. So I think just looking at one factor right there, it shows why that delta could be made up in one item versus another item, or all these other factors that I listed, the assessment transition. So one just between these two projects, it's a difference of 5% between the two of how much they're actually getting assessed. Inflation is a big thing, the REUs, the lot size, square yards of paving, even contractors. We saw that the contractor in D&E won the bid in C, and that provided us some good numbers in Morningside C. So lots of factors, and we just see that variation over all the years of our progress in street reconstruction policy. So we believe the assessment policy has been applied consistent over all those years. It is both fair and unfair. The Street Funding Task Force talked about that. It's in the report. We've said it. We recommend no changes to the assessments for Morningside C because we don't know how we would, if we change that one, how would we make it fair to all the other neighborhoods that have been done previously, or what we would do going forward. That'd be a big question mark in my mind. So we intend to seek approval of assessments in October of 2024 for both Morningside D&E and Morningside C unless we hear otherwise. So I'm happy to stand for any questions at this point.
So we postponed doing the assessment in this neighborhood because you weren't quite done with the project. I think it was just the end of the season, and some of the neighbors came and said, let's just hold off doing any assessing, I think.
Yep, that was Morningside
One of them.
for D&E.
And you did.
We held off, so that'll be coming back. And we just, because of the flood project, there was some stuff delayed, and it made sense just to wait till this year and complete the project.
You think you'll have your numbers tightened up by October of 2024 and be ready to assess, and you think these will be close to the actual numbers?
Yeah, we think D&E is that $8,340. We already published that and posted it, and we were ready to assess that number.
Yeah.
The 9,500, there's a little contingency in there yet for some stuff we need to finish up this spring, early summer. But that's our estimate now, hoping that comes down even closer. So these two are gonna be pretty close. And in my opinion, that delta is just covered on all these factors we've talked about already, so.
Can you go back to the map that shows the large parcels that don't have any REUs?
Yep.
Okay. Which ones are public?
Which ones are public? So this is a Lynn Kipling inundation area is a big pond, that's public. Weber Park, the purple, this is the school, they're assessed the number. And this is a school that's not located in Edina. This is here in St. Louis Park. St. Louis Park, what's the school? Susan Lindgren School. Yep.
Okay.
So we have no access to our streets, so we didn't assess them because we base it on transportation.
Okay, it's based on transportation. With parks that are not in flood zones, do they get REUs?
Yep.
Because they can be, okay. And for me, I find that difference a little bit arbitrary because you still need to access those areas that are public, that are in floodplain. And they are still dependent on roads and all of that. And so I just want to put that out there, that that is the thing that I keep coming back to. And as I think about this neighborhood, I wonder about other neighborhoods where we may bump into this again. And I understand the whole philosophy of we need to stick with what we have done, but I could see this coming up as in another neighborhood as a problem if you've got a park that is in a flood zone.
Yeah, I gave examples, Arden Park, many examples already where we see this every year, basically. Wherever there's a park. Arden Park, we assessed ourselves 5, but there's a lot of the park left. Because it was in the flood shape here, it wasn't assessed, these 2 areas. And then Normadale, same thing. We didn't assess in here because it's a pond and in the flood shape. So yes, it happens regularly.
Right. But here, in this case, I can understand why they're saying this is not fair.
Yep.
So, okay, go ahead. Can you just speak about that a little bit more? So when you go through the parks, and so the thing here though, before I ask my question, is consistency. And so if we can look at our processes and say we're applying those processes consistently, then like, there might be other factors, but as long as we're applying the same factors in a consistent way, then like that makes sense to me. And so the question I have is, there's 2 from a consistency perspective. One is probably how we draw the border, right? Are we consistent in how we do that? And then the second one is this question about the parks. And so when you just went through that, you talked about parks where we assessed REUs, some we don't. Is it 5 REUs or 2 REUs? So just kind of talk through that process. And again, what I'm looking for is, are we applying it consistently across the city?
Yeah, great question. So how do we pick our borders? We look at the original plats.
Okay.
And start to draw lines around where kind of the similar size lots, right? We don't want huge lots in with really small lots because then we feel like one's subsidizing the other. So we try to be consistent with lots. We're not ever going to hit it exactly. There's always different size lots, but we've used the plats to develop those borders. And then on I think these graphics here probably show, when we're in a park, it's not just 5 or it's not just 10. We look at similar size lots in the neighborhood. So if you look at this purple shape, we are doing 5 because if you took the same size lots on the other side, that's what it was. Now, if we were in Morningside and they're really small lots, we'd put really small lots in there and see how many it counted. Pamela Park, we assessed for a big portion of Pamela Park, that whole side, because it was out of the floodplain and right adjacent there. So that one, we had a big number for assessment. So we are consistent with how we apply the lots into the parks for our own assessments.
We're consistent in determining what the unit is
Exactly.
that we're gonna use to measure an REU. Okay.
And our assessment, as long as I've been involved in this, our assessment methodology, well, at one time, I guess we did it on a linear foot basis. Then we switched to REU. Residential equivalent unit, thinking that the data showed that households have a certain number of trips per day per home.
Exactly.
So if you assess based on REUs, on trip generation, then the reason that we assessed some of our properties that were buildable was because we assumed that had there been houses built on that property owned by the city, they'd have an equivalent number of REUs per household. But in a situation where you've got parkland that's either in a floodplain or not developable, it can't sustain an REU or a buildable lot, then we don't assess, even though there may be some indirect benefit to that property.
Correct.
Because there's a new street going by it, but nobody's going to a home in that park. There's no park there where you park your car, no parking lot.
Yep,
So
that's correct.
so the question is, do we want to change your you want to change our philosophy relative to how we assess publicly owned property.
Yeah, that's the question, because that would change
That's the
this.
question.
Yeah.
And if I add on to that, I think that's the question, but then I would do that through the lens of, are we changing it in a way that allows us to be more consistent in how we apply that? Because that's, to me, that's the crux of the I don't want to call it an issue, but the challenge. If we can say that we are being consistent, then it's almost as if you could ask the opposite question of the neighborhood. Here's the process that we use. Tell us where we're not being consistent. And then wherever those areas are, maybe you look at those. But if we're being consistent and we don't like the outcome because of whatever the factors are, then as a city, I think we're in a good position from that perspective, as long as we're being consistent in how we apply it.
We are consistent, and the petitioners don't like the 0 lots, the way we're applying the laws. So that's the crux of it.
Well,
Well, are we applying the 0 lots the same?
We are.
Right, that's what I mean by consistent, yeah.
and this will all be moot when we get to 100% tax.
Yep, in
So
13, 14
we made
years.
that big shift and said it's both fair and unfair. And by the time we go to 100% tax, then it just, the whole thing's moot. So to open that up again, I just don't think it's worthwhile.
Well, and I would also be concerned if we did change what consistent measures we're looking at, then do we open the door for everything else that we've done previously?
Right.
Right, like I think that we had the task force made the assessment that's both fair and unfair, like this, they did 16 plus meetings to get to this, and I support it, like I think it seems as consistent as we can be.
But we have considered building projects in floodplains. So in that regard, we're not consistent. Like the Roslyn Park Fire Station proposal. So I guess there's a little, if you look at it from that point of view, that's outside of assessing for street repair. But if the argument is we're not building in floodplain, but we do
But we didn't.
explore, we didn't, but our policy isn't to look and see if it's a floodplain and then move forward with a project. It's different. Just a
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah, I just think you're looking at developments or building versus street recon and.
Mhm.
So the only other thing I would maybe add, if we are being consistent, we should be able to answer the question for the residents. If the issue is 0 RUs, the answer is, here's how we're consistently applying that across the city.
Right.
And you still may or may not like the answer to that, but again, it puts us in the right position to support it. If we can answer the question in that way, got it, that's your concern, but this is how we consistently apply this across the city and be able to demonstrate that. And then it's up to us to decide if that consistency, if we want some different outcome for whatever reason, and we could look at that, but that wouldn't be part of this process. So we should be able to answer those questions. In that context, we should be able to answer the questions.
Yeah, and I think we have. We've met with them, we've talked to them, but they disagree with the answer and how that's done, so.
Kate's point, if you said that we were going to always assess parkland, regardless of whether it was buildable or not, then and we made that kind of a policy change, then you would have people coming back from other neighborhoods that have been reconstructed and say, hey, wait a minute. You know, we bore the brunt of not having buildable lots, and now you're saying you're gonna assess the city for every parcel it owns based on what a lot might look like, the closest lot size, you know, and make those correlates to sort of allocations. I think it would be a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in year two, to Carolyn's point, we were in year two of the transition years, so there's a benefit there too.
Right, right.
And this is a pretty compelling slide, I think, that they're on 30% wider lots, therefore less density. And if you just applied the differential on the 30%, they'd be higher than they are otherwise by $1,300.
Yep, and much higher if we didn't change the policy. We were thinking it'd be around 20,000 for assessment, so that policy change made a huge difference here.
Okay. So, yeah, I think James kind of hit the nail on the head, that we're being consistent. Do we have any inclination to change the policy relative to how we assess park plan? I don't get any big, I don't see a movement afoot here.
Okay.
So there isn't anything we need to do tonight, but this is what's gonna come to you later this year.
I did have one other question. When you talked through the estimates, you said from Morningside C, that will come before us when?
They both will be coming in October.
In October.
Yep, that's the final assessment hearing.
Yeah, and so the question I had is, each time you've shown this, I think there's been a trend that it's lower. And we know that we can't guarantee that to continue. But my question is, are we doing anything to try to manage that, to get it to be lower, other than the things that you added earlier? Like changing the scope of the project clearly reduces the cost. But are there things that we're doing in terms of management of contractors, how we structure the bid, how we manage a construction account, those types of things?
Yeah, when that first column comes in front of you in December, that's a preliminary number. We got contingency in there. We don't know the bidding environment. I think once we open bids, we want to ensure that Aaron and his team is putting together great documents, so we get really tight bids and get really good numbers, right? If we see confusion and a big spread of bids, we know there was some confusion in those plans and specs, and we didn't do as good a job as we should have. So we really want to make sure the plans are rock solid, so everyone's bidding on the same thing, they understand it, and that's when we get these better numbers. But we do have contingency in there. We'd rather aim a little high to start and come down over time if we can. Doesn't always happen, but it's happened really well before, so. Go ahead.
None of it was scope.
Yeah. I mean, we always look for,
Okay.
we always look for
We
process
didn't
improvements.
reduce anything, any of the proposed improvements.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to make sure we're doing the infrastructure right. We've heard that from this council. If we're going to do it this once every 50, 60 years, let's do it right. And that's what we ensure too. Yeah.
And I've heard you describe some of that process in the past. I asked the question because that actually might be worth digging into the details a little bit more, so people understand how we do our best to manage, not just to manage to the cost and the quality, but to also ensure that we're getting the best price for the work. And if there are things that we're doing from a process standpoint, when we look at this in October, it'd be great to be able to go into a little bit more detail there.
And we want to do it at the right time, right? We're going to hear some about asset management later tonight. And we want to do it at the right time. We don't want to pull stuff out that still has some life in it, but we also don't want to be digging up streets 5 years later. So we got to make that call on it.
Yeah, that just allows us to be able to say, we get the impact to you, to your community, to your neighborhood. We're applying this consistently. We hear you, and here are some things that we're doing to actually try to manage the costs. That trend to continue, those kinds of things would be good.
Okay, well, thank you.
Just an observation, where Carolyn raised the issue of the changeover in the way we're assessing these projects. And as we move through that 16-year cycle of gradually getting this all on the general tax roll, the general levy, it has been interesting to observe that there hasn't been a big uproar at all. You know, we were worried about having a bright line and having somebody say, well, I just paid $20,000 last year, now I gotta help pay for all these other streets in town that haven't been done. And because of the methodology that we chose to follow based upon the advice we got from that task force. And all the work that you did in conjunction with that task force and the consultants, it really created a situation where it's been a pretty kind of a soft landing in a way. And has caused people to feel like this is a fair way to do it.
Yeah.
Which is really a wonderful feeling. You're doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next.
Talk about the Grandview parking ramp.
Sure.
EDA issues over there.
Well, a little background. So recently staff sought an approval of a contract change order for the Grandview pedestrian bridge. So we had discussion at council and the HRA. And council wanted to understand the project history and potential future steps related to ADA and that Grandview parking ramp a little better. So that's why we're here tonight. I'll give you an update. We did receive a Department of Justice letter. You're aware of that. It was to review an ADA complaint. So staff and legal, we provided a response on March 13th. That was the deadline for the response. Now we're just waiting a response back from the Department of Justice. And in my mind, I think there's two questions, right? Department of Justice is going to review, does the PED Bridge project meet ADA requirements? So it's that legal review. And then I think there's a staff and council discussion of should the city have conducted a larger project and done some other changes to the parking ramp and the scope of that parking ramp. So we'll see what the DOJ has to say. We don't have any, we expect months before we see a response is what we've been told. And once we have it, we'll share that out with the council and the public, and we'll do that. So just getting into the background, are you familiar with the Grandview parking ramp loaded behind the Jerry's grocery store and tower? There's an alley here behind the Walgreens and Edina Liquor, kind of an alley street that functions there for deliveries. Gus Young Bridge is up here on the right-hand side, upper right. And then this is looking at the entrances. So there's an entrance to the upper uncovered part of the ramp and then the covered lower. And you can see just on this picture the grade change between the two. And that's really the challenging piece that we've all identified for many years as we studied this area. So just keep that in mind, is this big slope difference.
This ramp was built in 1987. Was ADA in effect?
No, so it was built before those standards went in the early 90s. So yes, I'm glad you brought that. That's why I had the year on there. Thanks, Mayor. Built in 1987. And recall in 2010 and 11 and 12, a water treatment plant was built in the garage underneath both those levels of parking. So water treatment plant number 6 is in there, and here's just some pictures from that construction and the big large tanks that they got in off Brookside into that underground. It was a parking area. So we do yearly inspections of that parking ramp. It's required for public safety, and the ramp is permitted by the city. From those inspections come maintenance recommendations, and we push that to the capital improvement plan. Right now, we're seeing an issue with concrete and chloride. We're doing an investigation there with all the salt use for snow and ice management, which Jerry's does. We're seeing an issue in the concrete, and we're hoping we don't see an issue in the pre-stressed steel cables that run and support that structure. So we're testing this spring to determine the depth and the damage, and from there we may be pushing some future maintenance or capital improvements to the parking ramp.
These are some of the sort of issues we saw at 50th and France when we did that ramp repair over there.
So could be something similar. Well, that was a different construction technique, but similar things. We want to just understand the situation, make sure it's safe, the public is parking in it. So if I go back to the guiding principles, there was a big group of planning commission and residents that developed this area as a area of change. So 2008 to 12, there's some pictures of those meetings, and they developed 7 guiding principles. And I just underlined a few of the words, connected district. There you want to use the natural topography, more vibrant, walkable. Parking is convenient, and improve the movement within and access to the district for people of all ages. And I think you're seeing us doing that with many of our street recons around the area. And it really goes back to these guiding principles. So in 16, we did a deeper dive. So those are guiding principles, high level. So we did a transportation study in the Grandview District in 2016. And from that study, this idea came out, which identified that north part of the ramp, that picture I just showed you with the 2 very difference in elevations, that the plan was hoping to put a street through here in front of that municipal parking ramp on the north side of the tower. We just knew at the time we couldn't do it. It was too steep to do it and meet ADA requirements. So that LHB study came up with this idea of having access between Jerry's and what is now the Avador. At the time, it was a potential development. and coming up Brookside and entering that covered way from Brookside. Add kind of an overpass over Brookside to enter the ramp there. Then we could close one of those entrances on the north side of the ramp. So this was an idea, and in fact, when the Avidor got approved by council, we have an easement. We could do this on-ramp if we so choose in the future. So with that Avidor development created a TIF district, and we had an opportunity for some public improvements. We have a 5-year window, so in 2020, we came to the HRA and council on many occasions and asked, should we study some things that meets the guiding principle that could improve the district? And they said yes, the council and HRA said yes, so we studied Eden Avenue in Arcadia. That's where that project with the roundabout came to be, and then we studied the pedestrian bridge idea for this, because we knew there was gonna be future development on the old public works site. It was kind of some concepts of what that could be, and there could potentially be a park. And we knew it'd be nice to unlock the parking of this ramp on those off hours. After 4 o'clock, that ramp is pretty empty over there. So Kimley Horn and Dan Qualls here tonight to answer any questions. Their firm did a study of the parking ramp and this pedestrian bridge. So the first thing they looked at in 2020 was, would a bridge even fit? Would it meet the rail requirements? So you're looking at the parking structure here in this lower left corner. Here's a potential, at the time, was a proposed pedestrian bridge. And then we noted the potential development on that old public works site. How could we unlock that potentially from a pedestrian access? So the first thing they looked at is, well, the rail requires 23 feet minimum over the tracks. If we put a bridge there, where's it hit on the parking structure? And it lined up fairly, I mean, it was like it was planned for that kind of thing. So we knew it was possible, and again, we shared that with the council and the HRA. They also studied how do we potentially close one of those ramps entrances on the north side, either lower one or the upper one, and create some speed ramps within the structure. So here's a speed ramp within where we'd take part of the deck and you'd go down to the lower and upper. You can get between them within the ramp. And the other idea was kind of an express ramp over the alley that is the back loading area to Jerry's Hardware. So they looked at that idea to unlock this connection between the levels where we could close one of these northern entrances. At the time, we also looked at, as the bridge itself and landing was being developed, a connection to Gus Young, because there's a sidewalk on Gus Young. This is a back alley back here. If you've been back there, it's just not a pleasant spot for any sort of walking or biking or rolling or anything. It's got different slopes. So this was an idea. When we started to scope out the level of investment that this was needed, it didn't match the opportunity for the funding in the TIF, and we didn't study it any further. It wasn't part, we said that could be a future phase, a future opportunity when maybe something else happens within the district and creates that opportunity. So moving ahead, now we've gotten approval. We went to council, the HRA, we did all the aesthetics. You know, Bill Neuendorf managed the aesthetics and public art process where we came up with those decorative panels, and we built it in 22 to 24. We built a sidewalk from Arcadia, that's the orange. The green box is the long pedestrian ramp or pedestrian bridge over the rail. Then the ADA compliant landing and a short bridge that just connects to the top of the ramp. That was the scope of the project. All of that is built to ADA standards. That's compliant today. The blue is a set of stairwells that able-bodied person could go down to the lower ramp, or they could go north into the parking or that back alley that we had talked about. So that was, and we got just a little bit of finishing up to do the railings and a few fencing over here that still didn't get installed, and that'll be coming later this year. So now we heard the comments from council and the HRA when we had that scope change order. So we started to look at some numbers, and we said we can look at some of this and then potentially look at it as when the capital improvement plan comes before you this year. So we went back to this idea from 2021, and Dan and his team put some numbers to it. So this is estimated at $1 to $1.5 million because it's a super steep grade down to the rail line. You have to build large retaining walls and really support that type of ramp to have that access to Gus Young Lane. We looked at a switchback ramp, just getting access to the parking lot, but it really gets to almost the same spot as this, other than it is ADA compliant coming off the landing. So you'd have access to the parking alleyway, but from there, there's not a route anywhere else from there. So again, you're kind of stopping. And this is pretty common, incremental improvements. We make improvements when we have opportunities, just like a street project. We rebuild a block of sidewalk. The next block may not be ADA compliant. When we get there in the next cycle, then we bring it up to speed. And then we looked at one further option across the top level of the ramp. So here's where the shorter bridge connects. And there is we had the structural engineers review this, that's the key to the thing, want to make sure that it could support this, but there is a way to build some lightweight concrete and build a 8-foot wide, ADA compliant route along that north wall. You would cut an opening in this yellow, and I got some pictures here to show you a little better. Pictures through this median, it's compliant through the opening, and it's compliant along this wall for slopes and cross slopes. And then we could add a metal ramp. You typically see these in front of residential homes when somebody starts to have mobility issues up to the front door. They make a commercial grade metal ramp that we could install here. Push the 4 steps that are here, they could be pushed out, and now someone could wheel into the Jerry's Tower only during business hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but then they'd have access to that elevator. And we're estimating that's a $100,000 to $200,000 cost. And again, that's something for discussion with the council, with the CIP this year. We would lose 16 parking stalls up there. There's a formal agreement with Jerry's. We own the ramp. I think we could just remove those parking stalls, but I'd like our attorney to review that legal document a little bit more if we ever decided to do that. Jerry's is responsible for maintenance. They basically do snow and ice control, and that's it. They were supposed to do more than that, such as painting and some other stuff, but it hasn't happened as well as we had hoped since the 1987 agreement. This does require a little bit of structural support below that deck to support the ramp over here, but again, that's within that estimated cost range. So just give you some pictures. I'm sure everyone's been out there. Here's you're looking straight north, across the shorter bridge, and then you access that upper level. Here, now you're looking west, and between that white line and the wall is where you could build an 8-foot wide route that's, right now it's pitched too steep. You'd have to create a flatter slope, side cross slope to make that compliant. Again, you'd go through this median here, and then you'd go across the opening and across these walls. And eventually this in here somewhere where the black and the red car, you'd start to see that metal ramp would come up, and you'd be able to get up to the top of those 4 stairs. Those stairs would be pushed out, and now you have access during that 7 to 7 to access the elevator within Jerry's, if you so choose to do that. And that's a private enterprise there, so it's public infrastructure connecting to a private enterprise.
So, okay, if you're in a wheelchair, you're gonna be rolling right in front of the ramp that cars use to get to the upper deck.
Correct, you'd be going across that opening, and you would signify that with maybe, I don't know if we showed right here, crosswalk markings, similar to what you would do, you know, hashing out parking stalls, similar to that. So there could be pavement markings there or signage to let people know that's the route. That's the potential. Then I just wanted to, currently today, there is 4 ADA accessible parking stalls in the covered level, the under level that goes also through in the Jerry's Tower, 7 to 7, same hours, there's an elevator there. That was again 1987 construction. The van access, the existing height limit is 7 feet, 7'2", right in that range. If you look at what the recommended height for van accessible parking structures today is, it's 8 foot 2 inches. So it's a foot lower, and not much that can be done unless you totally reconstructed that parking structure to meet the actual van accessible height requirements for a parking structure. But there is spots in there today. There's 4 of them along that wall next to the access into the tower. We did close everything down. We tried to build some temp railings, and we just closed everything down with a Jersey barrier on Arcadia and a sidewalk closed. We got 6 different chains and sidewalk closed. This is our typical practice in parks. It's been our practice in front of City Hall for every winter since we've opened. We got a chain that closes those walks. I do get an email from Nora Davis. She tells me when people are walking, and I say as soon as they step over it, it's their own liability at that point. And we're not policing it, but people are doing that. So until the permanent railings are installed across the stairs and a couple fences that need to be happening on the east side, those will be compliant railings, and that meets the building code. We'll keep it closed until that point when we can open it and safely open it. So I'm just back to where we started, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time. So that was just a history and a background and where we're at. So that's what I heard the council requested.
The issue that was raised in the DOJ letter.
It just said that we got a complaint that says the pedestrian bridge wasn't built to ADA standards. That was it had 11 questions we had to respond to.
It's like an inventory of,
Like, give us the plans and specs, who's the contact person, what was done, tell us the decisions, what was the analysis? Do you have federal funding was one question, but 11 questions, and we're happy to share that letter. We've shared it with a few people that have requested it. So we don't know if it's just an inquiry at this time. You asked if it was litigation or anything. We're just waiting for a response at this point, so it's not. We use the League of Minnesota Cities to help us respond. We use one of their attorneys, Hannah Felix, who's helped us on other ADA stuff, and she helped us put together that response.
So Chad, could you go to the map that has the potential sidewalk through the woods there with the red? Yeah. that one.
Yeah.
So that would take us out to Gus Young Lane.
Yep.
How about, what would it, to go out to the new area that's being built on 50th?
Yeah.
Would that, is there a sidewalk there? Would that get you out to that fancy new bridge we're gonna get?
Great question, because we are taking advantage of the opportunity of the Vernon Interchange project to redo the front door of the liquor store. This whole area right here, it's steep, there's stairs, it's not compliant into our own liquor store. We're redoing this whole thing, so the route we're building today is across here. This will be changed where it comes through here and then has access to that new interchange at Vernon and Interlochen. And then you decide what side of the road you want to go, because you're going to have 10-foot wide sidewalks on both sides, and you can pick the side, whereas today you got one narrow one on the north side. So, and then when Gus Young, if this bridge only has a sidewalk on the south side. So we didn't want to create access. There is a sidewalk here today, but it accesses nothing. It's not, so we're removing that sidewalk until a future date when this bridge is redone or added to. Then we'd make that little connection on the east side of Gus Young. So the route really be across there, in front of the liquor store, and over to that signal.
If we eliminated the parking and put the path where the parking is, would that be cheaper?
Definitely.
Okay, why aren't we even considering that?
This is employee parking for some of the users of the thing, but it could be a discussion, right? If council says,
I would
We
love
wanna
to know the
utilize that.
differential for costs. for
Okay.
that. And also, I wish I had thought about this when we voted on the change order, but there were contingency fees, I assume, for the pedestrian bridge, project. And I'm just wondering what happened to those, because what was it? It was like close to $300,000 that we added for the bridge project, if I'm remembering correctly.
this one, we did do a change order.
Yep.
We didn't have contingency in there.
You had no
There was
contingency.
a hard contract number because we had to set that number in June of '21. So what we did is actually brought a few city utility funds in to cover the water main crossing, the storm sewer and stuff like that. So that slight increase was covered by city utility funds where we did utility improvements here as part of the project.
Okay.
Yep.
I got maybe a couple of comments. It's been my practice that ADA compliance is not subjective. So there's a guide that you follow, either is compliant or is not. Now, if we go and we construct something and we don't follow the standards, then okay, you got compliance issues, right? And so when I saw the complaint, to me, that's pretty cut and dry, whether or not, we don't have to wait for DOJ to come back to tell us if it's compliant, as long as we follow the standards, right? And you're an engineer, so, right, it's fairly black and white from that perspective. So that was never a concern when I looked at it. But the other challenge, and this is subjective, where, you know, it's kind of often said that, and I'll use this as an example, organizations are trying to be inclusive. And there's a response that says, well, you're either inclusive or you're not. Yeah, nobody has to try to be inclusive. And so as we look at what we're putting in place, I think looking at the lens of, well, this is what compliance is. However, what more can we do to make it even more accessible? And so I think you went through some of those options in your deck, but I think that to me is the lens that not only we need to look through, but we have to communicate the narrative around, well, hey, here's other things that we're doing. We're not satisfied with just being compliant. We want to ensure that we can add and make it even more accessible. And these are some of the things that we're looking at. And so I would, as we move forward, it's incumbent on us to kind of tick both of those boxes in a clear way so people understand what we're doing.
And this project does, and I have mentioned that it does really scare me, because I was that mom pushing the stroller with my kids, walking all over the place, going to grocery stores, putting stuff, you know, beneath the stroller, pushing it back. And as I think about somebody doing that, you know, and I think about, you've got Maison Green, you've got affordable units there, you've got people who probably want to go to Jerry's, purchase groceries, and have a safe pathway. And this just gets them to the upper deck of the parking ramp, and then you've got to scoot down the car access in front of the, you know, drive-through exit where people are coming out from Walgreens, and it's just an absolute mess. And I think, you know, as we consider projects, the scope has to be looking at how people are not just going to get from one little point on the project to another, but how are they going to pass through? How are they going to get from that bus stop? And let's imagine someone in a wheelchair who is getting off of the bus, and then they are needing to make their way to their home. And so it's got to be a broader thing. And if it's not, then it's not necessarily public infrastructure.
Where's the bus stop at?
There's one along Vernon,
Vernon,
and then there's one further down.
in front of
By
Jerry's.
the
Over
library.
here, and then there's one at the library. Yeah, there's a few along Vernon there.
Back in the day when the Grandview task force were convened, Michael Schroeder always had a unique way of saying it. We wanted to create places to go to, and then also places to stay at. That was one of his favorite phrases. But also looking at routes that get you to the district and routes that get you through the district. And one of the 7 guiding principles recognized that we wanted both. We wanted to get to the district and through the district. And that one of the principles intentionally said, this happens in incremental phases. Because we recognized we couldn't do it all at once. One of the other projects that was funded at the same time as this were all the roadway improvements on
Eden and
Eden.
Acadia, yep.
So we installed 2 sidewalks there where before 1.5 existed. One started, but it ended. So we turned that into 2 full-length sidewalks with ADA curb cuts and all that. We worked with Jerry's to get through the parking lot. So from Eden up through the parking lot to Jerry's front door. So this was all part of the same funding package. So I think those are also some routes. Because when we scoped this particular bridge design, recall that we were and still are under contract with the restaurant to build a restaurant on one side of the train tracks, and they will use the parking in the parking garage as part of their required parking. So that's why we funded the project at this time, the bridge piece of it, because we wanted to get customers from the parking garage to the restaurant. And we did, as Chad mentioned, we did look at a lot of other routes and just didn't have the money, and we couldn't find that next incremental piece to make it reasonable at that time. But I just wanted to mention those other sidewalks, because that was a lot of work, and it was all part of the same 2021 approval.
So it seems like there are 3 paths. One is you come across the bridge and you go into the office building and use the elevator. One is to go north towards the newly improved, hopefully, interchange at Interlochen. But the other is, I think, what Julie's talking about, and that's going up towards Walgreens, go down the ramp towards Walgreens. And
Yep, this is it.
right, and that's a very dangerous path to walk, whether you're in a wheelchair, or slow, or very fast and strong. It's dangerous regardless. And so is there a way we can encourage foot traffic not to do that? Because And then to get down, if you want to go to the front door of Jerry's, you have to go down strange stairs and everything. It's a awkward trip.
I'd prefer to close the traffic, make it a whole pedestrian way back there. You know, improve it, make it a thing like that. But then you got delivery concern. I mean, that's a big picture idea. We had this as a potential development location, the Walgreens liquor. We didn't think that'd be there permanently. At some point, they're gonna maybe look for changes, and that could be a great opportunity too.
Word Wooner comes to mind.
Exactly. So we got a lot. When's the next opportunity, I think, is the key for that alleyway that's just a mess today.
Okay.
Well, and I think right now, that's the only route that's accessible, with wheels, stroller, wheelchair otherwise, because you can't get into the building because of the 4 stairs.
Yeah.
And so I think that,
Right now, yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And so that, how much has that been explored of, is there a way to make that route safer as an alternative to adding in the ramp to the elevator?
This route?
Yes.
We haven't looked at that at all, but we know we can't put a street in here because these are 2 different grades, so I think you would have, we always thought you had to close one to even make it compliant. But we really haven't analyzed from, I would say, this point to the opening. You know, if you're just, but even getting in here, this ramp would have to change, so you'd have to raise that up. Now the grades don't work back, it's just, we did some preliminary work in 16 when that idea came forward.
Okay.
Doesn't work with all the uses today. And again, if Walgreens goes away or different use, then maybe we have an opportunity to get a little extra space and now the grades will work. But as it's configured today, it's a real difficult scenario.
Thank you.
But right now, the way you tee this up, currently, it's ADA compliant, and we're looking at other options to increase accessibility
Correct.
and maintain safety.
Correct.
The bridge itself,
Right.
in isolation, is ADA compliant. But the concern is, once you're on the roof, there's no compliant place to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What we built.
I'm trying to be crystal clear though.
Yep.
The complaint was, is the bridge ADA compliant?
Yep.
And so that's the question.
That was question 1. And then later in the question, it brought in connection to a parking ramp. So it wasn't real clear there, but it basically called out the pedestrian bridge project. So what we built is compliant. Now it goes to the other question of inclusivity, making a better
Right.
thing.
Exactly.
That wasn't the scope of this project, but let's look for opportunities to do more in the future.
I'm concerned because I see it as inherently non-compliant. Because the only way you can get to the bridge is to drive up on the ramp. You have to have a vehicle. And you have to be able to drive up and drive out if you are, you know, in a wheelchair. And so I guess I'm having a really hard time seeing how we can view this as an ADA compliant project. The other concern that I have is, you know, when I had to move large, heavy objects with students at St. Thomas, we had to walk the walk because I wanted to make sure we could get all the twists and turns and everything. And I feel like it would be really great if, you know, like, and I know we've communicated about this, but on Valley View Road now, that segment on the north side is closed, and anyone wanting to get to the bus stop is gonna have a hard time. And yes, this is an area where there's a lot of sidewalks, but you have to like skitter across Valley View Road where there's no light, or you have to go down, cross at the light, go all the way down, or go around the block. And I feel like we are not necessarily looking at sidewalks and blocking sidewalks and what does that mean when it is now out of use, or what does it mean when we build something and it's not connected so that somebody could actually, in a wheelchair, use it and, you know, get through, not just to. So I am concerned about both of those situations, because I keep seeing people, you know, having to walk on France Avenue or having to walk on Valley View, or, you know, and someone told me they saw a father holding a baby stepping into Valley View Road into oncoming traffic because they couldn't use the sidewalk. And it's just, I feel like we've got projects that perhaps would work in communities of maybe, you know, and these kind of issues if they were like a community of 5,000 people instead of 53,000, and as a first-ring suburb of a large metropolitan area. So I want to get all of that out there, because it just seems like some of this is just really not making sense when you think about it as needing to be necessary transit infrastructure.
Okay.
Can we go back to the picture of the ramp itself where, yeah,
These are the.
where you're on the ramp and you look to where you're going, just previous to that one. So where that white line is, that sort of is supposed to not, that cars aren't supposed to cross, you can see that little black car has crossed it. Is it possible to put some delineators or something, or cones or something on that white line so that those cars aren't blocking that? So until we can get, phase 2 or whatever, that's clearly marked for pedestrians to go across.
We could, again, it's sloped more, but able-bodied people could use it, anybody could use it, yeah.
If the cars aren't supposed to cross that white line, I'm not sure that
Pretty common practice you see in
it's
parking
pretty
lots,
common
yeah.
practice, so if we could put something to indicate that, no, your car shouldn't cross here.
We'll look at that. We did a couple here in the roundabout, just to keep people there. That's something we could look at. We just gotta think about snow removal, but maybe we put just enough
Well,
to
maybe in the summertime.
look at it, so, okay.
That's a really good idea, though, because I went up with my husband, and there were cars really close to that.
Over the line.
And, no, but, and we couldn't even get through.
Oh, sure.
Like, it was really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just say this again. ADA compliance should not be subjective. And so we need to be clear about what we've done, whether it's compliant or not, right? We've already said it is. And we're doing all these other things to ensure that we have safe and we can increase the accessibility and maintain quality and safety, right? That's what, and so when we talk about it, we've got to separate those two things, because if we don't, it's gonna get, I think it will get confusing when we say, well, I don't see how we can say it's compliant. Well, it should be very concrete for us to go through the standard and say, yep, we've met the standard. We may not be satisfied with that, which we all are saying we need other things in place to increase the accessibility and the safety, right? But we have to say both things. And then the other question I had, which is not related to this, if you go back to the right there. So this is another one where I made the statement earlier about being inclusive, right? Nobody has to tell us to be inclusive. We are an inclusive organization. So I get that we do this, right? But I don't know that what do you call that? The barrier.
This?
No, the sidewalk, the chains.
Oh, it's a chain with a sign?
Yeah, and so I get that we do that.
Yep.
And the comment that you made is, well, if somebody steps over it, then it's their liability. Well, sure, technically that is true, right? But are we satisfied with that as how we want to maintain safety in certain implementations, right? And I think that warrants us, this does, in my opinion, warrants us looking at that as well. Now, that wasn't the topic of your so I get that.
Good point.
But I think we should consider, should we be doing something else there to just ensure that people are on that, that they don't step over it, right?
Just a caution sign even.
Or something, yeah.
It doesn't matter what, I'll be honest, it doesn't matter what we put in there. People climb fences, they climb stuff, they get everywhere. They'll get across, they'll get onto this bridge because it's not closed at the top, but we don't put roofs on them because people climb on them. So I can show you pictures of cars going around everything, but an 8-foot opening between trees and they didn't want to go around the block. So we can put up everything and that's great, but people are going to climb it and get on there.
You remember we
Less
had,
people.
we had Jersey berries over on Dover, and they'd
169.
go through people's yards to go
3
around
yards.
north on 169.
You see it at 50th of France, they're on everything over there. Kids are
You know,
climbing.
As we were having this conversation, I was thinking, years ago, we had a resident that lived over by Arrowhead Lake, and he had been incapacitated. He was wheelchair bound by virtue of an accident, I think, and he became an expert at the state in ADA. And it just, his name was Kurt, I can't remember his last name, but it struck me that in thinking about conversations with him, he would be sent out by the state because not everything always was so clear. And when you're trying to retrofit things that were built before ADA, to try to make them work now, even he would say it's kind of complicated sometimes, you know, and it's unclear as to what you're going to do to solve a problem. So thanks for continuing to work on this. How you get around, go to that slide again where you got the overhead of, you know, getting around the north side of the jury's office building. And then down to Jerry's that way. I don't ever see anybody walking, but you know, there's that, the other way, as you're heading toward the front door of Jerry's grocery store.
Yep.
Right in there.
There's, no, isn't that Jerry's office building?
Yep, here's the office.
Yeah, okay, so you head around the north side there where the,
Yep.
where the Walgreens is over the way, over there with their drive-through. I don't see many people walking the way, although I think there is an entrance to the building over the north
There
side.
is, yeah.
But there is an opportunity when you get past the building on the northwest corner. Then it's just sidewalk going down to the lower level. There's no way for anybody to get down other than down that steep hill in a wheelchair, with traffic, you know, going both ways on a narrow road bed. So all these things that we're trying to do, I think, are good things. And let's, you know, we're going to do the best we can.
Well, thanks for the discussion.
Okay, thanks for that update. And have people that have asked for data from the city, they've gotten the data they?
Yes, yeah, we get data requests through the city clerk and.
Letter from the DOJ and our response is about it.
Yeah, we provided the letter. Whatever Sharon sends over, we respond to those data requests.
And if we could get the response that was sent to the DOJ, that'd be great.
Sure.
If it had been litigation, I can see why you would have been careful about what you responded to from a data practices request.
And when we first received it, we didn't know. I've never had one before, so I wasn't sure how we should treat it. And so we did have a chance to vet that with the league. And
Having vetted that idea, you determined that it was appropriate to release the information.
It was just facts, everything we've had and we've shared with many people already is what they were looking for. So just the project specs and plans and contact names and dates, and so none of that was really private stuff, but. Okay.
We'll look forward to more engineering updates here.
Yeah, they're looking forward to it.
All right.
We're lined up
Thank
for
you.
tonight.
Anything else? Council members? All right, we stand adjourned.